Hello and welcome to Eastern Marshland's Bolshevik Bistro. Today we are here with the author of the book Can the Left Learn to Meme, Mike Watson. Mike, thank you very much for coming on.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
So, so this book, we'll just launch straight into it. This book, would you be able to summarize it for those who might be interested in reading about it?
Okay, yeah. Basically, it's a book that deals with the kind of avant-garde dream of a horizontal culture. That is to say, the kind of early modernist dream culture for all, a world in which anybody can basically make, can produce, can receive culture on an equal footing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it approaches the idea that never really transpired through the art world, but is happening online. Um, Media, left tube, online gaming, etc. Only it's not happening quite how we intended, in the sense that we have something approaching a kind of democracy, culturally speaking, a democracy of kind of expression, but people aren't doing with it quite what we intended. So the question then is, is this a good or bad thing? And then there's a kind of angle. Theodor Adorno, the German philosopher of the kind of middle of the last century, which we'll talk about a bit as we go.
Mm-hmm. So this modern age that we're in, with the accessibility of the internet, would you say it allows us to communicate with anybody we need to, allows us to organize with anyone we need to, but instead we're just looking at cat pictures on the internet?
Well, yeah, there is that angle. I mean, it certainly allows us, as you're suggesting, and you kind of, I think you would agree with the proviso that it allows us to contact anyone within certain limits, or certainly we. But there are countries that have, bigger restrictions, and then the contact that we have with potentially anyone is subject possibly to surveillance, or we know that we could be being watched, even if probably no one really is bothering to watch our conversations. But
Hmm.
there is certainly an element of freedom that is unrivaled, and it's what we had always wanted, but it's just not being used how we intended, in the sense that if you were, I don't know your age, but I was using the internet first in the mid 90s, when a
Ah,
friend of mine
yes.
got a kind of dial-up connection at his house in England, where I came from, and we would go to his house and we would like look up kind of minor communist groups from across Europe, because we were into left wing stuff. That, this is amazing. We can kind of hook up with communist and anarchist groups from Germany and Italy. Homepages, we can find text by Marx which you wouldn't have found in the local library,
Ah.
and therefore, if this thing is extended globally and everyone can use it, it's going to naturally lead to a kind of global, because like democracy would lead to more democracy, would lead to some kind of leftist moment
Mm. So you were
here
there right
globally.
right at the start when people around the world started to
Pretty
talk to one another.
much when it became a global, when it came known as the kind of awkward now sounding World Wide Web.
Hmm.
I was looking at it, yeah, and it was introduced in at the end of my schooling. I don't
So
know what you would call it where you are, but kind of high school, college
yeah.
days, we were using it there, yeah.
So picture in your mind you're sitting in front of that computer screen with your mate, and the dial-up has just done its thing. It's connected. What was the world you were envisioning at that point? Was it like a very interconnected, very um, intellectually connected internationalist leftist group, or did you even think that it could get to where we are today?
I mean, I suppose probably the outlook was quite naive, and I struggled to put myself in my kind of 16 to 18-year-old headset. But um, we started looking at Marx. We were in contact with which was the communist wing of the Communist Party of Britain. Yeah, I guess we were thinking of it as somehow a globalized communism, where because people could come together, and because knowledge was equally shared, that would kind of lead to a global awareness.
Mm.
It looks naive now. It wasn't out of touch with what theorists were saying around the same time, and later going on to like the big moment of intellectual.
Mm.
A few years ago, you had blogs by Mark Fisher as K-Punk, Nina Power, Graham Harman, etc. This kind of fervor of like somehow we can, if not now the global revolution, we can somehow throw a spanner in the works of leftist academia and politics.
Mm. So this
Push and get their voice out.
yeah,
Yeah.
this level of communication and whatnot is really sort of drawing the curtains back and allowing lots of people around the world to really see how the world is.
Yeah, and that's definitely happened, and it's definitely led to people having voices that wouldn't have had voices. And I think also to identity politics being kind of a major
Mm.
aspect of mainstream politics.
Well, this pulling back the facade and whatnot and revealing how the world really is. You mentioned in the book that the upside down world in Stranger Things is what the world truly is. So what is it when you mention Stranger Things? The upside down world is like an allegory, but if it were to happen to someone in the real world, what would it look like? Would it be like Neo taking the pill in the Matrix, or like from They Live, where they put on the sunglasses and they see behind the advertisements? What would we expect to see?
Okay, sorry. Just to kind of fill in any of the listeners, the full name of the book is "Can the Left Learn to Meme? Adorno, Video Gaming, and Stranger Things."
Hmm.
It's a look at kind of meme culture in the widest sense, and it incorporates Adorno, some video gaming, and Stranger Things. So basically, it utilizes Stranger Things and talks particularly of the upside down, the kind of shadowy underworld in Stranger Things, as a kind of reflection of the real world. It's a kind of dark underbelly, the dark underside of the real world that we tend to ignore. Kind of imposed matrix of rationalization, perhaps of a bit of religion, if you're religious, politics, of a kind of an ideological framework that we impose to try and ward off the danger of nature, in the sense that we're part of nature, but we kind of pretend we're not, and we're always kind of trying to separate ourselves from the most basic fundamental threat of nature, which anyway will kill us all. We think that our mortality is part of nature.
Mm.
So we kind of build these structures. First, it was for Adorno, kind of early magical thinking, where you would make kind of charms and objects which would ward off evil or bring you good harvests. And this grew into religion. And then the Enlightenment period ostensibly kind of was supposed to get rid of this kind of very naive thinking, which could be abused by the powerful in the form of religion, and bring in science. But then science for Adorno didn't really solve this, because we end up kind of imposing a matrix of numbers and measurements on things, which, actually trapping ourselves within. So this kind of system of numbers, of measurements that science, the Enlightenment period brought about, has ended up subjecting even humans to its mechanisms. So you're worth a number, I'm worth a number. We've all become reduced to numbers, i.e., wages,
Mm-hmm.
because of science and rationalism. So Adorno says this is all an attempt to get away from the kind of fearful aspect of nature. So for me, in Stranger Things, the upside down is this fearful aspect of nature that is kind of reported into the world through the Hawkins National Laboratory, these scientists who are trying to kind of some way. So it's kind of a metaphor for how science tries to banish nature, but actually amplifies its dangers by kind of within its kind of second matrix, the numbers game, capitalism, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So how would the underworld, and how would the upside down look to us? What's the metaphor in this world? It's the reality of us being linked to nature,
So
us being fundamentally natural.
So is this a sort of a way to say that we've strayed from nature, or should we realize and look at the upside down world and see how the world really is, and then try to change it, try to fight against it?
I mean, I guess it's not really like a hippie or kind of that wants to embrace nature in any kind of hugging trees or dancing around the maypole sense. But I guess the point is that the Enlightenment never really was the Enlightenment, that it picked up with this kind of idea of questioning everything, but it didn't really question everything. It got so far and then it erected quite rigid systems immediately.
Mm.
Adorno is kind of saying we need to kind of drop the rigid systems. We need to go with the Enlightenment forever. So you're constantly kind of challenging every assumption. So for him, that the real issue is that we tend to think in terms of what he calls identity thinking, that we tend to identify things to try and control them.
But it seems like there's a bit of
Religion,
that mentioned when you're talking about I apologize, I forget the name of it, but there's that art presentation that takes ages and takes thousands and thousands of submissions, and they select only, like, out of 4,000 they come down to about three, I think it is. But then what sprung up was an art exhibition of the rejected. Um, so it seems like, in a way, to fight back against this rigidity of art, in that, no, you are not art, you are not allowed to be presented in this gallery, the way to fight back was to say, but because I'm rejected, I am the art of the rejected. And suddenly we're just adding yet another label onto this thing.
I mean, yeah, you can apply it to art. I mean, that was some way through the book, called the Salon des Refusés.
Ah, yes.
Excuse my French pronunciation. The Salon of the Refused, the rejected artists. So basically, every year in 19th century France, there was like this big exhibition that you had to be part of to become a recognized artist, and it always ended up being that only certain people with kind of quite dull kind of academic drawing and painting skills were included in the exhibition. So
Mm-hmm.
there were complaints made to the emperor at the time. I think it was Napoleon III, and he made, basically, because he wanted to be a popular guy, he made an exhibition of all the people who weren't allowed in the main exhibition. So it's kind of a massive rupture with kind of the artistic establishment. And yeah, I mean, I guess it's comparable. It's kind of like losing control in
Mm.
the cultural field. Yeah.
So when someone at that time sort of notices how, um, only these boring academic pencil and paper people are getting featured in this art gallery thing, there's a strange sort of topsy-turvy, upside-down world to art. Is that a moment similar to the allegory of the upside-down world in Stranger Things?
Yeah, I mean, for Adorno, it's definitely the case that the only way of like getting back to the realization that we are part of nature, the only way of kind of opposing the kind of evil controlling auspices of capital, is to kind of immerse yourself or get lost in abstract art, in kind of new and radically unknowable art. So basically, for Adorno, the problem is that we're trying to control and we're trying to know stuff too much. By his logic, the only way out of that is to be confronted with something that you really don't know, you really can't understand. So by definition, it has to be something, a kind of artwork that's either very new, so it can't yet have been categorized,
Hmm.
abstract, so you can't understand what it's supposed to be.
So this want to push into the abstraction, um, I think you explore it a little bit in the book, featuring the art world quite heavily. Um, why, for example, did you include the story of that artist who was one of the rebels, fighting against the system, and then he started to make lots of money off of his art, and then he was brought into the art world, and he worked specifically for a gallery. Then he was I think the what I got out of that little story was that he was eaten up, chewed, and then spat out by the art industry itself. But how does not categorizing and pushing towards expression play into that story of that artist being chewed up and spat out?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of references to kind of the mechanisms of the art world, particularly how young artists are treated, and the kind of trajectory one kind of follows from being an art student to being, in very rare cases, a kind of a famous artist. Jean-Michel Basquiat, probably people are aware of him, as a New York-based artist, 60 and died in 1988 of a heroin overdose. And basically, he was taken as a kind of young, talented graffiti artist under the wing of people like Andy Warhol. Kind of this exotic countercultural figure who was really kind of pushed. And the kind of mechanism is that a gallery will pick up an artist who's young and kind of free thinking, and they'll start to say things like, that's great, that's really liking the blue ones, I want 10 more blue ones. It's kind of a horrific kind of thing you don't want to hear as a freely practicing artist, that someone is pushed into certain kind of factory-like mechanisms, and then they can be pushed so hard that they end up burning out, which is basically what happened in this case. But basically what I say is that the art world is not the place to do art anymore. So if art is like, if through different generations the figure of the artist is like a countercultural figure that can somehow get us out of this kind of systematic control under capitalism, if the artist is that figure, the artist is not going to come through it to fruition through an art world that is basically beholden to capital, because the art world is all about making money.
So this example of that artist is people trying to commodify art, trying to profit off of art, off of their expression.
I mean, basically, that's what the art system is about. Well, I mean, for Adorno, at an extreme, nothing can really resist commodification. So, I think the thing with the art world is that, again, nothing can resist commodification. Football, I don't know, what else can we think of? Left tube video making, anything one does is part of the capitalist system. But the art world, or at least the artwork, the artist pretends not to be. Art has this kind of glow, that it's somehow a little bit special and not responsible. And so I think the really disappointing thing about the art world, and the really dangerous thing, is that it poses as being the place of kind of resistance to commodification, but actually is very much the opposite.
I think a prime example, if I may give one, is memes themselves tend to be able to resist being commodified, because you can't place a copyright on a cat picture and then try to charge people with copyright infringement. Just can't be done. But what you can do is find that specific cat and then have an agent book appearances for the cat. Especially the example I draw up is Grumpy Cat as well. I cringed. I shuddered. There's a thing there. We'll talk about shuddering in a minute. I shuddered when I saw that this cute cat that always looked like that it was angry was suddenly appearing on the Ellen show, and I thought, well, that's it. That's the death of that meme, because at that moment it turned into that production line profiteering off of a funny meme. And I think at the point at which a meme ends up being on the news, that's when it tends to be the last nail in the coffin, and we move on to something else. But that moment I had where I saw the cat and I shuddered. You mention in the book that there is a moment when we do see the upside down world, that we have this visceral shudder. Could you elaborate a little more on that?
Yeah, basically, the shudder is a mechanism that runs throughout Adorno's work. and it kind of explains how we might be reunited with nature, or with the reality of us being part of the natural world that we're trying to escape. That if the problem is that we're always categorizing things and always kind of controlling them through rational systems, and he talks about classical music, a certain classical music of, for example, Schomburg, so quite radical, experimental 20th century classical music, or the theatre of Samuel Beckett, so kind of like absurd theatre. And he says that in seeing this, one can kind of be lost in the artwork. And in that moment of being lost in the artwork, you kind of forget between yourself and nature. So probably it's happened to you, or any of the listeners. I think it's particularly or with some music that you're listening and you kind of forget yourself. You kind of forget your bodily edges. In that moment, he's not saying that moment, but he's saying in the moment that ends, in the moment that suddenly like comes to a stop, that's the shudder. You have this sudden jolt, and you're back to consciousness, and you suddenly realize that you are living in a false distinction, a false kind of reality where we distinguish between ourselves and nature and ourselves and each other.
Okay, so was Adorno trying to advocate for art to be an experience to create a shudder in people, or was he saying that art should be doing that?
It's basically go on, yeah.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, so basically, I mean, Adorno basically, he's saying that art is like the last recourse. That art is the only place that this could possibly happen, and he's saying it because art, as I said earlier, it kind of has this pretense to be free from capitalism, and for Adorno, crucially, it's not free. But the thing about art that might be useful is it does the trick that any kind of object, any commodity does. So it's like, you see a t-shirt, you think this is cool. Everyone's going to think I'm cool in this t-shirt. You know, we see I don't know, what things can you see or buy? Perfume, and you think, or aftershave, and you think that's going to make you more attractive. And these things kind of work, but not really, not for very long. It's very momentary. So, but basically, objects sell themselves to us by claiming a kind of property they don't have, by claiming something in excess of themselves. So what Adorno says is that the thing about the artwork is it's not ideal for countering capitalism because it doesn't do that. It's ideal because it does do that. It's this thing of pretending it has properties it doesn't have, but really to an extreme. So an artwork will say like, hey, I'm the object that's not part of objectification. I'm the commodity that's not a commodity. So you actually, you feel that looking at an artwork, this is something beyond, normal somehow. And it's only for that reason that for Adorno, art can maybe lead us to the shudder and break us out of commodification or capitalism.
Do you see any forms of art or expression or songs, media today, other than Stranger Things, obviously, that's that's a step in the right direction?
In reality, Stranger Things probably doesn't do that because it's so clearly a commodity. It's so clearly embedded in capitalism, being part of Netflix, having kind of product placements for Coca-Cola. And in actual fact, it's quite disappointing in that sense, the third season, that it's so obviously a capitalist object. I mean, maybe there's small moments in Stranger Things because it's visually very striking, because it's kind of scary in places. Maybe there's moments that can cause the shudder. But for me, it's more that in Stranger Things Part 2, or should we say Will Byers does these drawings. At some point, you probably know, or if you've seen it, you remember. He suddenly starts scribbling wildly these abstract drawings to be a map leading Hopper to the upside down. So what I'm kind of saying is that it's analogous of Adorno saying abstract art can lead to truth. The fact that his kind of crazy scribbled drawings that seem like nothing kind of lead to this moment of realization and lead people to the upside down. So it's kind of an analogy of how the shudder works, because Stranger Things is kind of a good point of access for people because so many people have seen it. But whether it can produce the shudder, I mean, I actually think there's very few things that can produce the shudder. And I actually think Adorno was kind of, he was himself. I think Adorno was looking for like, a last recourse. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, yeah. I'm just.
Sorry, I had my computer doing something strange, something funny. Okay, Adorno. I mean, Adorno was a German Jew exiled during, or I think just before World War II. He ended up spending a lot of time in America, where he taught in or researched in Columbia University in New York. I mean, he was witness to, you know, heinous, terrible stuff in the shape of Nazi Germany, and we're looking at terrible, heinous stuff today. We haven't got. I hope we don't get to that kind of level of depravity. But he would have lost friends, and he was fully aware of the kind of the worst that can come about through fascism, shall we say.
Hmm.
For him, there was really not much hope. You can't in that situation go, hey, we can make art and that can save us, or let's have a revolution, because everybody had revolutions that have gone all quite wrong.
Hmm.
Revolutions and parties that claim to be revolutionary, who then kind of totally were worse than what went before. So Adorno's looking for, like, in all this mess, what, how can we possibly claim there's a way out? So he finds it in the kind of most unlikely place, in art. Nothing else can help us. But he's saying there's this little small chance that through the artwork, the abstract artwork, because it's nonsense, because it can't be understood, it can break us out of everyday life. So it's like countering absurdity to absurdity. And it's really a kind of desperation. If you look at his examples, it doesn't seem that Adorno's so convinced this can really have much of an effect.
And
we are today. So I think that's why he's useful.
Would you agree or believe that meme culture might be that way out that Adorno was talking about, or one of the ways we could make our way out?
Adorno was kind of famously anti-pop culture, but I mean, at least he studied pop culture, and he was one of the first to really study it in depth. So he was kind of putting attention on it, but he was wary of it because it was such a part of capitalism. The thing is that the world of memes is also, I mean, I'm in two minds. We can't ask Adorno because he died in 1969. But I mean, we can try and think what he would think. I mean, the thing is, memes on the one hand are like super free and open. Anyone can make them, anyone can publish them, within boundaries, but many people can. So where Adorno was kind of wary of mass media, what he called the culture industry, because it offered no choice to the kind of passive viewer, there's definitely much more choice now. We have way more choice than we had in the 80s, 90s, even 10 years ago, 5 years ago. We have all these kind of platforms we can use. We're not just passively receiving the media, we're making the media. So in that sense, the meme culture is very valuable. Can it produce shudder? I mean, it's definitely commodified, because it's always kind of contained within the internet. So every click on the internet is basically monetized. So why I think it could produce a shudder, memes taken together, the massive internet productivity taken together, is so chaotic, and just has this maybe capacity to turn things upside down.
You were talking. We were talking right at the start of this stream about that moment where you were sitting in front of your computer. It seems as though when you talk about how anyone can make memes, sorry. When you talk about people making memes and whatnot, it's very apparent that the alt-right and people on the right, white nationalists, fascists and whatnot, are starting to use the culture war and memes and media and, dare I say it, art, to try to get people onto their side. Is this the misuse that you were talking about before, the wrong direction for art to go in?
I mean, it's definitely into this idea of identity thinking and control that Adorno was opposed to. Even if we go beyond Adorno, I'm not sure how useful it's kind of very tense moment we live in. I'm not sure how useful very aggressive memes stating very clearly case. I'm not sure how useful that is. So I think okay, so Nazi memes are bad. We're agreed because we're left wing.
Yes.
Okay, but I think also very aggressive left wing memes are bad because they just kind of end up some right wing memes. It's like conflicting hate with hate. So I mean, I'm not sure that, but you may be very different, and this is will be unpopular with many people. But I'm not sure the imagery of communist systems that have been responsible historically for mass killing, imagery associated with them is the best way to counter. Um, so I think the thing is I think that the internet can produce many things that can lead us in a left wing direction, completely unknown new direction. But I don't think Soviet memes, for example, are one of the things that in themselves are going to help change things.
Hmm. So so if the left can sort of hone their memeing abilities and we start making better memes, so can the left meme? If the answer is yes, how can we use these memes? How can we use this art that we produce to further the labor movement, activism, unionism, what have you?
I think that the mass of memes in themselves are something. So I think like a left meme that I don't think is particularly useful are the mass of memes that just kind of disorientate because there's so many and they're so varied. As a mass, it can help make a difference. And I think there is that embracing the mass of information and the diversity, which I think is very left wing.
Hmm.
Aside from that, I think a good term to use, which isn't in the book, but it's like almost like book, is acid communism. This term developed by Mark Fisher.
Hmm.
Mark Fisher, the British philosopher who was with Zero Books when he wrote Capitalist Realism, who passed away a couple of years ago, or he's no longer with us. The last book he was working on talked about what he called acid communism, and it's been something picked up as a meme. And you can see Facebook pages dedicated to it. And I think it kind of embodies two things: the craziness of acid. One doesn't have to engage in taking LSD if they don't want, or any other drugs. It's up to them. But that with a kind of controlled sense of communism driving towards a kind of new leftist world. So how if we could combine the two, what would we end up with? And I think
Hmm.
that's what's going to be most interesting in the coming year in terms of leftist memes. And the memes tend to be kind of radically abstract, psychedelic type memes.
Yeah, the abstract nature of it's especially are you familiar with the different genres of memes?
Genre in which way do you mean? In
Well,
which
there's old school memes where it's the multicolor background of like advice dog or philosophy raptor, and then there's the more dank memes where they reference a little more MLG stuff, but it seems that the height of this is um oh I'm forgetting the word for it, but it's memes that talk about I'm trying to think of an example. I think this is the thing. Like you have to actually see the meme in order to describe it because it's oh, indescribably confusing memes. Um,
I'm trying to think if I know what you mean. I mean, you don't mean shit posting.
no, not
You
shit
mean
posting. No,
don't no.
shit posting is different. Um, no, it's memes that talk about meme man. You have been in the void for 42 hours. Are you okay? And it's this stock a stock 3D rendered head that's drinking meat juice. It's very it's very uh it's very weird. But after all that, there is a reason I bring it up because you in the book mention vaporwave. Um talking about the aesthetics of old school Windows user interfaces and slowed down beats and whatnot. And I believe you were mentioning that it was a form of expression that can't be commodified because of how abstract it actually is, in that there might not actually be an audience for it. That's sort of my interpretation of it. So after all that rambling, I apologize. So my question for that is, should the left be creating memes of expression that can't be commodified?
I mean, that would be good. Yeah. I mean, I think it's possible. So vaporwave is kind of commodified, as we said earlier, because it's principally broadcast on the internet or published on the internet. So by nature, it's feeding into like Google and
Okay.
making the money. So, but I think the thing about vaporwave is a kind of difficulty in really grasping anything there, and really the radical negativity. What partly is that's just it doesn't really have any kind of like, oh, it's just this very sarcastic kind of aesthetic.
The negativity you mentioned, that was the question I was trying to remember. Jesus Christ, it's very late in the evening for me here. I
Okay,
do
yeah, no
apologize.
worries.
There appears to be a lot of negativity and apathy in the memes expressed by the millennial generation, which is mentioned in your book. Um, is this apathy that's very apparent? Is that what's holding back the left, or is that something that memes could help us break through this apathy, get people agitated and then organized and then so on and so forth?
I mean, I talk about millennials running through the book, which basically is something that is teaching in a university, American university in Rome in Italy, called university actually, which has a very strong media department. It's quite an interesting reality. It has a strong kind of very contemporary media department, just bang in the middle of ancient Rome, or Rome with its kind of ancient and Renaissance history. And basically, I found myself teaching predominantly millennials, and just amazed at really. I mean, they were kind of bubbly and happy in a sense, but they're kind of strong cynicism towards any kind of or theory. And really, when I looked at it, I thought, and these aren't assholes. Sorry, excuse my expression, me being their professor. But they're not bad people. They're not nasty people. But there's kind of a tiredness, from millennial generation towards theories that never really worked
Mm.
historically. You say to them, well, why aren't you more left, or why aren't you this or that? And I think there was kind of like a tiredness of like, as a professor, I ever asked him like, why are you not more left? But I mean, because that would have been a bit too much. But you kind of think, why are you not more engaged? And you think, well, the majority of them did grasp basic Marx, but they're just kind of looking at history and thinking, well, it never really worked, hasn't worked yet. It's thrust upon them, and I think this is what makes the online millennial left, or the online millennials generally, so negative. It's just this kind of feeling of like there not being anything of the first generation doesn't really believe in any kind of redemption through Christianity or other religion, or through communist utopia, or some kind of capitalist trickle down economic effect. And I kind of think that that's in a way sad, but in a way good, because it do come up with is going to be fresh and new, and
So,
has some small possibility of working. So I think the negativity is like they just feel negative because nothing's ever worked, and they haven't got this kind of feeling of like, oh, maybe there's going to be a utopia or some kind of redemption. But this radical negativity may spawn something new. This is kind of what I'm getting to. That it is an abstraction that out of which perhaps something will come.
so perhaps it's not so much apathy; it's more, if I'm using the word correctly, a nihilistic outlook on the world, wherein it's like, well, why would we even try to push for Marxism when we'll all be dead in 10 years? that sort of a thing. Would you agree?
Yeah, that, and maybe people I taught weren't quite there, but this is definitely what I see in the kind of in meme culture and vaporwave. Yeah, I mean, I think like there's in mathematics a negative, a minus is a plus. Like it's negative, but nothing's worked yet, so maybe something will come out, something will come from it.
Hmm.
Or it can, it's a bit Adornian. This, in fact, Adorno's system was negative dialectics. This is why I talk about Adorno and millennials, is because it's like almost they are the Adornian generation. Even if he would hate them, and
Yes.
they probably not at all interested in him, it's still in some sense the Adornian generation, because Adorno basically says we're really in terrible situation. He says there's a famous line of Adorno, that one cannot make art, and what he really means is that in a society that produced Auschwitz, which is kind of for Adorno the kind of radical conclusion of capitalism,
Hmm.
there can't be anything good made. How can one make something ostensibly pure, even pretending to be, out of those conditions? But he says in the same essay, he's often misquoted as just saying like, one cannot make lyric poetry after Auschwitz. He later says one has to keep making art anyway, so that we don't surrender to cynicism. And I see that in meme culture. There is that radical negativity that doesn't come from the same place, but it's still negative. Um, but then people keep producing anyway. So that's why I
Mm.
think why I think Adorno is relevant to his negative dialectics. Was him saying, okay, Marx has a system of materialist dialectics. He says like different social classes kind of clash, and out of that comes an improved society until different social classes clash again, and in that way it keeps developing. And no such positive reality can be conceived after World War II. So he goes about instead just trashing everything, but still in the hope that by trashing everything, something good can come out.
So to
Something might emerge. So it's a bit like shit posting
so
in a way.
to say oh, why even try when we're all going to be dead in 10 years is to surrender to that cynicism.
To say why try when it's all going to go down,
Because
to hell in a handcart.
yeah,
Well,
because
why try when it's all going downhill? It would be would it be a surrender? But he says that we cannot surrender to cynicism. We have no choice but to keep making art.
it uh so if we're in this world where we have to keep making art, as Adorno says, how can we use art and expression to further different causes around the world and for the left?
How might we use it? I mean, it's difficult. I mean, I think there's two things. There's what Adorno knows, or what Adorno said, which I know something of, and there's what might work, because he died in 1969, and
Mm.
because also, I don't. Why should we really care what one person said? In a way, I think it's interesting as a kind of a toolbox, or like we can use Marx's thought, but we don't necessarily have to follow it. So just quickly, Adorno would say work that's very political. Like you paint a big Donald Trump and you write "fuck Trump" on it. Then that's not actually going to change anything. That's only really going to feed back into the system, the negative system, the aggressive system of conflicts that Trump came out of.
Mm.
Art that directly depicts political situations is not going to work. Only abstract art will work. So I think in this sense we could say, okay, we're going to follow Adorno today. Only abstract art is going to work. But I'm a little bit dubious about that, or I think it's dangerous, because if what we're going to do, we're going to carry abstract artworks to the White House and do what with them, or Johnson, who's now British Prime Minister. This not in itself going to change anything, and we are in desperate times. Adorno was talking when everything had really gone the worst it could go afterwards, whereas we're before. So I wonder whether art could be used in much more direct ways to get the message across. I
Mm.
understand his point of abstraction is valid. That this thing of radical abstraction, negativity, might be our best hope. On the other hand, within that, the massive images on the internet. I think there's plenty of scope produce images that are directly informative of our situation, because I think there might be time just to stop us
Mm,
down the fascist route.
I think my little mini review of the book right now is that when I was reading it, there did seem to be a bit of just for myself at least, a disconnect between what was written and sort of the call to action in the book and literal in your face tactics of, say, protest and organization and, you know, fist in the air class struggle, that sort of thing. I think a question to ask is, the book is quite abstract in its expression. For those that read it, what could they take away into their next, say, branch meeting or march or protest or demonstration?
I mean, one thing we haven't talked about is the strong critique. Actually, I think early and in the end of and Steve Bannon. So these are people who are right wing, who are in millennials. Okay, so both of them think millennials have lost their way, and both of them are trying to kind of provide a framework in some sense. So Bannon is trying to. Well, Bannon did kind of recruit them, did kind of raise the kind of right wing online rhetoric through Breitbart when he was director, and then ended up running Trump's campaign, and then was his chief strategist in the White House. Always with this idea that millennials, because they're lost, can be somehow hijacked and used for his kind of right wing plans. And then Peterson has taught millennials for most of his career. Only now, I think, post millennials will be entering university. So now he'll be teaching what we might call Zoomers or whatever we're calling them. and Peterson basically, he thinks millennials are very lost, and he's written his book. What is the book even called? 12 Rules for Life or something, which is like a self-help book of how people should kind of stand up straight and tidy their bedrooms and this kind of comical stuff.
Clean your room, bucko. That whole thing, yeah.
I'd say that he says that all big changes start with small changes. So he says that if your life's in disarray, start by making your bed. So it sounds like a kind of parent admonishing a child. So he's got a lot of that, but he's basically saying millennials are lost, and he's given them a way out, but his way has lots of religion and right-wing advice in it. So the book is saying that, you know, millennials might be lost, but that's because they can't see any way, because the world was trash before they even got there. They are making loads of stuff, and they should keep making. Okay, is that going to halt fascism or stop climate change? Probably not. But I think we have a very long game. I don't think we're going to. Every time we tried the leftist revolution, it's gone badly wrong. So I think we have to look at a much longer game of how do we get beyond left and right and everything. And I think there is something to be said, a radical abstraction that maybe will throw up a new option. So I think that is good. So I think, I mean, it's my book, but I mean, I think it's good advice, or I think it's advice that has a practical value. But as for what I think, because it's not a book about protest, I think people should be protesting, but I think that's a slightly different issue, because I'm really talking about an image culture and an online culture. But you know, okay, take that as one thing, but definitely it's time to.
Yeah, I think the context for asking that sort of question is I've been working closely with activists and people who demonstrate and unionists, and on the stream Evening with Comrades, it's mainly been talking about you know, building the international left. So there's that sort of that type of questioning is in my brain like 24/7. So yeah, that's mainly the reason.
So how are you moving ahead? What's your conclusions or strategies?
Oh boy, a question for me. I was not prepared. Oh no. Well,
No, you don't have to answer.
yeah, well, after reading the book, I can see that there is this large generation or generations of people who want to express themselves. Like they will open a window and scream out into the darkness their darkest fears and their hopes and dreams. Um, but unless it can be entertaining or commodified, it's just not gonna get anywhere. And this um, expression, even abstract expression, turns to toxicity, where people try to get attention onto themselves. Um, I think to sort of link it to one of the questions I have written down is during Gamergate, you had people who were trying to spearhead the campaign against bad ethics in gaming journalism. So instead of people saying let's actually look at the ethics of game journalism, is there any merit to this? Instead of that, they started saying, hey guys, everyone look at me, I found more dirt on Anita Sarkeesian, check this out. So the abstract expression that people were trying to express was outrage, trying to get people mad, and they were trying to get themselves to be the source of the outrage. And my question would be that in a post-Gamergate internet, do you think that the right has perfected that sort of outrage tactic?
Yeah, well, I think it's a big reason for the rise of the right. Yeah, I think aged because they're already angry, and I think the right have stoked up that outrage, and I think they've taken it to the highest level. So I think it's what does it. Salvini in Italy does it. Yeah, I mean, it's a tactic that's really working. I don't know how the left can counter it, really. And it operates online. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it operates online, but it also goes through the main media channels as well. But it's kind of thing of saying the unsayable, of pointing to other people. The four congresswomen told to go home, for example. Example of this. So I don't think it came from Trump, but I think he's utilizing this strategy very effectively. Continuing online. So
do we get
I don't know.
do we get similar sort of things with that in the UK, especially now that Boris Johnson has been announced as UK Prime Minister?
I mean, really funnily, I haven't seen it like a meme movement kick off from the UK that's been really like globally transformative. Really would say that most of it's, I mean, of course, there are like internal meme cultures in Italy and other countries, but I mean, I'm living in Finland right now, but being English, I can really like see the English meme culture. Key things. There used to be a lot of memes around Theresa May because she just had this funny kind of way of posture, and she did this terrible dancing once on TV. So they were like these make fun of politicians, but they were not. I don't really see strong meme movements like the ones you see in the States. But in the UK, in politics, you do see this kind of use of a deliberate trolling or dog whistling, saying the unsayable or doing things, saying bad things because you want to attract just a minority of the electorate that can tip the vote your way. So Boris Johnson saying at one point before he was campaigning to be prime minister, but he's always been, his whole career has been one long campaign to be prime minister in effect. He said that Muslim women wearing the full veil, they look like letterboxes. Yeah. In the main newspaper. So, and he's now prime minister, and he continues to say things that are outrageous. And I think it's very calculating that, for one, destabilize things, and two, maybe choose political discourse. I think they're hell bent, Johnson and Trump and Salvini, in trashing rational, constructive political discourse because it's dangerous to them. They're trying to do that, and they're trying to trash the office of the prime minister and the presidency the status that that office holds, because that's not helpful to oligarchs who want to do whatever they can.
Did you ever see the meme movement, if it can be called that, of Kekistan?
Yes, I'm aware. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because
I can imagine the right wing state. Yeah.
yeah, it, I that seems like the sort of bad direction that we've been talking about, where people are united behind a certain way of expressing, because how abstract can you get with a nation that doesn't actually have a physical place, and having it be Kekistan, essentially. Could something like that be seen on the left, or is a Kekistani type meme movement something to avoid completely?
Um, well, I think it should be avoided, because I think it would give strength to the Kekistan. If you said, like, let's have a left Kekistan, that would kind of imply that the original movement had some value. In terms of left strategies,
Like a
just in
left
general, that I don't,
meme movement. Because I think
well,
one of the only left meme movements I've actually seen, unfortunately, is the Nazbol gang meme movement. That's something we gotta get beyond and past. Absolutely.
yeah, and similarly the Yang Gang, which is kind of very confused, in the sense that the kind of Andrew Yang is running for president, or running for the candidacy, as a Democrat, and he's offering, how do you call this thing? Like free money. How do you call it? Like
Universal basic income.
universal basic income. Yes, sorry. So he's offering universal basic income of $1,000 a month, and so there are all these memes saying, "Hey, yeah, great," and then there were all these memes saying, "This is what we'll spend it on." So there was like a meme of $1,000, or a kind of sack of kind of cartoon dollar bag, and then like some bongs or copious amounts of marijuana and stuff like that. So it's like saying, "Hey, yeah, let's grab this stuff," which I think was funny, because it's like, that's kind of how a young voter might think.
Mm.
But then you had the kind of disillusioned Trump supporters, the alt-right, a lot of them going towards Yang, thinking, literally abandoning, because Trump hadn't given them what they wanted, and kind of reopening American industry and jobs and things. So they go, okay, so let's take this $1,000 instead. But there's some of those doing that seriously. Then there was a whole movement of people thinking, hey, there are people defecting. Um, why don't we pretend to defect to Yang, and fuck up his image? So going over to Yang and taking Pepe the Frog with them in
Mm.
the memes. So there's this kind of total confusion that came about of, like, so is Yang left or right? Are his followers left or right? And it became a bit of both, and a bit of people just kind of throwing a spanner in the works. But I think the interesting thing about that is, like, okay, so the online left, the kind of memeing left, can just completely destabilize the political process. And I think this is powerful. And I think it's kind of what happened with the alt-right, is that was like a lot of angry guys going, what can we say that's even worse than before? Stuff that effectively is probably illegal, even in the States. Really kind of overt racist stuff, using swastikas, kind of egging each other on. And then that actually being fundamental in Trump being elected.
Mm.
But it's an instance of meme culture being very powerful, kind of accidentally and kind of irrationally. So I think there may be something in that for the left, but it's not something you can harness. I think memes by nature can't be harnessed.
We actually have a
Like,
question from the Red Mushroom asking, can memes actually be viewed as a finger quotes movement?
it's cool. Good question. Thank you. Can I don't know. I mean, in a way, a movement is interesting. and a kind of amorphous movement that doesn't have a leader and no one knows where it's going to go. So certainly not one that's directed in any way. I mean, it moves stuff, but like as I'm saying, it's unclear how it moves it. So this, there is this kind of temptation to say, okay, let's just memify the world, screw it up, and then see what comes out, which is a bit like leftist accelerationism. Accelerates progress, then we'll speed up kind of the demise of the planet, and something better has to emerge. But I think these things are very dangerous. I think it's slightly it's a, it sounds like a nihilistic, but it's slightly over hopeful. So if you just throw everything up in the air and see where things land, they might well land worse than before. So I think, contradiction of like, just how does one kind of let memes be memes with their power of turning things upside down, but somehow then harness that and move it in a certain direction, which is exactly what Bannon did.
Mm.
He saw the kind of the power, because he worked in Affinity Media. Do you know this story? Steve Bannon worked CEO of a company that basically sold like in-game goodies from World of Warcraft.
Ah, yes, I remember
He
when I
had
was younger learning about the gold mining accounts getting shut down. A friend of mine was very happy about it because he was on a PvP, a player versus player server, and he kept getting attacked by people who would just buy the best gear. I remember this. My God, I'm old. Jesus.
and I don't know how old you are, if you're if
Well, I'm
you're a
not even that old.
millennial
I'm
even.
I'm 26.
Oh no, you're young. Okay,
Yeah.
but anyway, but Steve Bannon, yes, he was CEO of this company that basically had people in mostly in Asia playing games to mine stuff to sell to American gamers, and then eventually the company, or that aspect of the company, folded because someone in Florida took a lawsuit because it was ruining the gaming experience on World of Warfare.
Hmm.
Um, and so Bannon saw this. He saw like the kind of his enterprise folded. He went to Breitbart, and knowing like how lost these young American gamers were, he said, look, there's these guys have this kind of animalistic or monster power. He said we can utilize these guys. So he got Milo, this alt right guy, was currently one of the editors at Breitbart. He got him looking at kind of raising up the kind of rhetoric of the right. So this is one instance of somebody harnessing memes. And if one can believe it, I think it's probably true that, I mean, Trump's margins were so small in becoming president, and Trump and the alt right meme community did swing it his way.
Hmm.
So for sure, it can be a directed movement. Yeah.
So these meme movements can sort of uh, accelerate in whichever direction, but in terms of the U.S. election in 2016, 2016, yeah, the U.S. election in 2016, it went in the wrong direction because the alt right got a hold of the memes of the memes of production and swung support towards Trump. Um, Talking about accelerationism, we actually have Positus Pac-Man in the chat asking, do you think Positus was right? And I regret having to actually ask that.
And to clarify this, this is Posadist question.
Yeah. Because we were talking about different meme movements, and then he said, like, hey, no, Positus gang is real. And really, I think that's a good question. Like, how real can these different movements be? Because we've seen Trump get the White House, but we've also seen well, have we seen anything like that on the left?
Um, Really, I mean, in Britain, there's online movement called Momentum. I mean, it also gathers like physically as groups of people who protest and who try to swing like regional local elections. by going and talking to people at their doors and stuff. But they really have a very much online structure in terms of organization, but it's very much like a wing of the Labour Party, on memic element. Has memes, I guess.
Hmm. Um,
Anything approaching the right, no. But I worry that can the left make these kind of memes that would appeal strongly to a disillusioned population?
yeah, it seems like the people who are disillusioned and most susceptible to the sort of swaying that Bannon or hijacking that Bannon does, it seems like these people are already leaning more to the right, or at least have that US centric right libertarian thing of I just want to play video games. I don't want to have to have politics in it. Just let me play my game about
Yeah, but
obvious obvious example
about
of a
politics.
political game here. Yeah.
Well, I think that people who are really angry, and there's this kind of sarcasm with youth as well, and the desire to upset one's elders. I mean, I think that leads to kind of very aggressive memeing, and
But
the only way
you think
the left can counter that is with like equally aggressive Soviet memeing or something. But I'm not sure how that's going to achieve anything.
I think you're right. Like Soviet centric memeing might not be the best attack back at it, but what I do see a lot of is shit posting. Whenever a fascist or a right leaning person gets onto a left Discord server, the thing that makes them leave isn't being defeated in debate or being banned or out memed. It's just being shit posted at. It's the leftists on the server have a good laugh shit posting about the fascist, and the fascist gets either so bored or so annoyed that they leave on their own
Yeah,
accord. So it might be that.
yeah. I mean, it could work. I mean, pressure exerted on forums and things definitely can have an effect. Whether it's going to make someone stop believing something is unlikely. I'm not sure how really productive this kind of thing is. I think it's just feeding back into a negative cycle. What I'm really getting at in the book is that the overall abstraction of taken as a whole and very deliberately abstract individual memes and videos can kind of counter the kind of society. And if we keep on making something in keeping on making could throw up something useful politically and generally culturally. Individual instance, I think the fact of trying to grab for individual instance which are going to kind of deliver us from where we are is in itself problematic. It's too much thinking that we have a control, and I don't think we have reality, and actual social movements are a bit like the weather. I think they're hard to predict. I think we have to try and stop what's going on with a slide to the right wing.
Hmm.
I
Well.
don't think we're going to do it by saying, "Hey, be more left" in memes. I think I would go back to acid communism, being maybe could a really kind of time contemporary movement, but somehow based or somehow encompassing kind of the best of the hippie and the punk and the acid house and techno movements. Could that like ignite a generation? Really move towards unity?
Hmm. Positives Pac-Man asks on that. I think. Do you think that this intellectual theory heavy approach that most leftists have is detrimental to the success of our movement, or torpedoing our own efforts to try to reach people?
It's a good question. I think the online left is not massively intellectual, and then actually there are a lot of left tubers that don't really got away with much of what they're saying 10 years ago when there was this kind of online theoretical blogging movement, which was very kind of theoretically rigorous. But that's no bad thing. I think it's good that it's become more accessible. Um, one needs the theory at base, but one needs to make it accessible. If we drop the ideas, what have we got? I think
Hmm.
there are all these kind of big books that are really annoying. I mean, I've never finished Das Kapital. I'm
I
reading
haven't
through
even
it very
started.
slowly. I mean, you've got some years to go yet. So, but yeah, I mean, these are dense texts. Should everyone have to read them? No, I'm not at all an intellectual snob, and that's why I really come to the internet rather than the art world, which I moved away from. Information in those texts and building any movement is going to be difficult. So I think you need your theorists and you need someone who can make them accessible. Sometimes that's the same person, sometimes you need others. I think that is what I'm saying about left tube is you have the guys that can make it, guys and women who can make it accessible, as long as they're working with the theories in some, as long as they're making the theories accessible and not just
Hmm. So we should be looking at new ways or better ways to express abstractly these the theory behind our praxis on LeftTube.
yeah, it can be like very simple terms or can be abstract. I think well, I think the thing with abstraction, the idea is that it's like one doesn't really know what they're looking at, and that somehow jolts you out of your kind of boundaries of like, this is me, I'm an individual, I need money, I need success, I need career. That person is like, you're kind of in competition because you're an individual,
Hmm.
that abstraction can break you out of that. And I think that's just kind of what Adorno's driving at. And I think if we had some kind of abstract movement which could break people out of their cellular independent existence, they wouldn't need really much theory because that would in itself, some kind of like music or some kind of, I think this acid communist movement, if it had like a musical wing,
Hmm.
but that could work. But and it could happen online. There's ways of making YouTube videos. There's ways of making content that could kind of snap people out of their individuality and make them feel more of a community. I think that is where
A sort
left.
of harnessing of popular culture.
Yeah, it could work. It could be that. Yeah, it
Mm.
could work through harnessing the popular culture.
Pac-Man again. He's just firing off questions. He says, "Do you think that harnessing popular culture is the key to our success or any
I think
success?"
there's some kind of thing of, okay, we need popular people who can speak, who can, you know, make things look attractive on YouTube, on Twitch, who can make fun memes to get people in, something to kind of like break people out of their individuality to some kind of like potent kind of or countercultural movement. And I think within that you need the ideas still. We can't just like Marx and Adorno, etc. Um, I think you need like a multifaceted approach, and I think we need many different people. So you've got people who are more theorists, and you've got people who are more things. And if you can use them together, like Zero Books YouTube channel has many different people contributing. Some are more fun, some are more straight and theoretical, and then you have like other channels. Then you have your channel, you have other people. You have this guy Gushian, but we had so many left tubers. They all got different skills, and together they can contribute. But you need to have like, I think you need to have the abstraction, the craziness, to jolt us from our very controlled daily reality, to make us feel more connected. So that's like the cool future memeing thing could be.
Hmm. Well, I think we've been talking for about an hour, just over an hour now. And it seems like that might be a good point to end on. Do you think we've said all we can about your book and the left and where it should be heading?
Yeah, I think it's been a great chat actually. Thank you. It's been some really good questions, and yeah, I just think there's something to build on with the left, online left.
Hmm.
If everyone pulls stuff together, and we need some kind of crazy Woodstock moment
Hmm.
if we can.
Where will your new book, Can the Left Learn to Meme, be available?
It will be available online in nearly every big online outlet. direct from zero, and then in major bookstores as well. Already for pre-order, although it actually comes out in the autumn.
Marvelous.
You can read the preview online already on major outlets. I don't want to say the name of one of the biggest outlets. It's like advertising, capitalists come.
Where could we keep up to date with things like your Twitter? What's your Twitter?
And my Twitter is, I have to look now. It's underneath the video, and it's @_left aesthetics.
Brilliant. And we also have a question about your cat in the picture. It appears to be playing Pokemon, and the question is, what's your cat maining? Pikachu, or is he rolling one of the 3 starters?
Anything you can imagine. That's not my cat. The cat looks very similar to that, and it actually ran away yesterday.
Oh
But we
dear.
found it, like it was hiding under the house. But he does play sometimes Pokemon. Yeah.
I think our audience and regular attendees on Evening with Comrades tend to be a little more comedic and shitposty. They're not used to asking intellectual questions. It
They don't
seems.
have to. That's good. It's good. I like the abstraction and the messing up of things.
Well, perhaps if you'd like, you could come on to an Evening with Comrades sometime.
Be perfect. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, whenever you want.
Awesome. Well, if you everyone watching and listening would like to keep up to date with everything Eastern Marshlands, don't forget to click like on this video and subscribe, and to come join us on the Discord channel. The link should be in the description. I want to thank you, Mike Watson, for coming on. Thank you very much. I want to thank everyone in the chat for joining us. And I guess that's it. So thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thank you. Cheers.